Now have a listen to this from former Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair.
If you don't have a clear idea of who's got a right to be here and who hasn't, which is what modern technology and a digital ID would give you, then, at any one time you can have 750,000 to 1 million people here without proper permission. So that's, in my view, that's the best way to deal with this issue.
Tony Blair talking to the BBC's Amal Rajan. So could digital ID help tackle illegal immigration? We're joined by Sam Sharps, Executive Director for Policy at Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. Sam, how could digital ID work?
Well, at the Tony Blair Institute, we work with governments all around the world, and a huge number of them are focusing on digital ID at the moment for a lot of reasons. And there are all sorts of compelling business cases why investing in digital ID is a good idea. Specifically for illegal immigration, the issue that we know is that there's a certain pull factor to the UK in that we have an informal economy where people are able to come and work with limited oversight and without a great deal of enforcement of their rights of residence. We've tried to take action on this in the past in the country. For about 20 odd years now, we've had duties on employers and landlords to check people's right of residency, but these are somewhat haphazardly applied and enforcement is rather difficult. Digital ID could start to address that in exactly the way that Tony mentioned on the clip, which is to say it would for the first time give us a really strong idea of who's in the country, who has a right to be here, and it would allow both employers and enforcement agencies to do much more rigorous, much quicker, much more straightforward checks as to people's rights of residency and right to work.
I mean, earlier this year, Tony Blair said the UK will need a little persuading, his words, to embrace digital ID. And of course, Tony Blair himself tried to introduce, or did introduce it, but it was got rid of, not digital ID, but ID cards generally. What can you say? Why are people so worried, do you think, about it?
I remember quite well the debates around this the first time around. I was a government official working on some of that. And part of the issue was that we tended to get a little bit bogged down on a rather old-fashioned concept of what ID was about. We had this idea of ID cards. It was something you carried in your wallet, something you produced on request by a policeman. And really, we have a much more nuanced and modern idea now of what digital ID will allow you to do. People will have a digital wallet. It'll be as simple as an app on your phone. Rather than hand over all your personal details to anyone who needs proof of your age or your ability to do something, you'll have a kind of tokenized system whereby you can just be authenticated as, yes, this person's over 18, yes, this person has a right to work in the UK, or yes, this person has a right to a particular government benefit. And it should be much more straightforward. The business case to individuals was probably undersold at the time, and the concerns around it are I guess, understandable in some certain people's points of view, but just we need to make that case really robustly and explain some of the safeguards around it.
All right, well, Sam, stay with us for the discussion. I mean, Natasha, it's been ruled out pretty quickly. There was a sort of brief thought from Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, that they might look at it, but it's been ruled out. Why?
I think because the government's just focusing on getting the job done. So I think if you think about immigration, simply making sure that the Home Office has the staff it needs to process cases means that we've seen a record number of returns as soon as we've come into government. So to kind of moving away from very simplistic approaches to things is paying dividends. So, moving on from things like Rwanda and making sure that we're actually just processing cases and getting on with the job and making sure that those teams are properly resourced is helping us kind of clear the backlog.
But you just heard from Sam, and actually the French Interior Minister has said it's one of the pull factors. Being able to come here, not having ID cards or digital ID means people can disappear more easily into the workforce. So that would help Labour's case and fight against illegal immigration.
I mean, would it? I mean, we have to really look into it. But I think at the moment the government is just focused on getting on with the job of setting up our border command and making sure we use that as a deterrent and making sure that so that we can end the devastating, awful situation we have with people dying in the Channel. That's where our focus is. That's where our energy is. I think when you get into a place that we've seen recently where you're focusing on other schemes and other projects, it takes a lot of focus and a lot of pull and resource away from the Home Office just getting on with their job.
Ava, do you think it's an idea that should have its time?
I don't think that it matters the way that it did during Blair's time. I think that all of the concerns and worries that we had about ID cards are actually redundant now that we carry smartphones around with us. So actually, private tech companies have so much information on you, and if your phone gets into the hand of the police because you've been arrested for something and they have a warrant to go through your phone, they'll know exactly where you've been for the past 4 or 5 years. They'll be able to look at photographs of you, far more information than a government could ever have of you. So actually maybe the conversation should be, should we start regulating what private tech firms and what information they're allowed to hold of you, rather than whether government should be able to issue ID cards?
Right, you were a technology minister. Is this something Conservatives like you could ever embrace?
Well, look, when I first got appointed back in November 2023, I actually went out to Estonia, who have a centralised digital ID system. It works very well for them. They've obviously got Russia on their border. It works very well. It wasn't something that we thought would be feasible from a centralised big state perspective. It didn't work. However, what did work was clearly, technology is advanced. The private sector's adopting it. Banks are looking at it. So we were looking at, in terms of the data bill, making sure our data is safe. But look, Joe, the question was, will it stop the boats? And clearly it won't stop the boats, because we had a deterrent. Whether you agree with the deterrent or not, I know clearly Germany are starting to.
We don't know if it would ever work.
Germany are looking at that, and and clearly this Labour Party, and the reason this is in our narrative now is because they're just bereft of ideas and they don't know what they're going to do. And they were talking about digital IDs because that seems like the silver bullet. It's just not a silver bullet.
Sam, do you want to respond?
Well, don't get me wrong, I am absolutely not arguing that this is a silver bullet or this will prevent all channel crossings or anything like that. Clearly, there are a lot of other measures the government is going to need to take and is already looking at, as far as I understand, around international cooperation, around proper resources for returning people and so on. The thing I would say about the informal economy and the demand factor for people coming to work in jobs in the UK is that whether or not we believe there's a real pull from the informal economy, the gangs who are smuggling people in absolutely do believe this. And if the government's serious about smashing the gangs, which I very much hope they are, this is one factor we're going to have to address. I totally get the political concerns around digital ID, and there's a certain history here. What I would say is the current government, I think building on the legacy of the last one, is already going some way towards bringing people into a form of digital ID through its government sign-on process, which is starting to gather more and more people into. And this will become an argument that becomes pretty much unassailable.
Alex, what do you make of those arguments? And just to remind our viewers and you, the French Interior Minister said specifically, the UK is a place you can work without papers and have little chance of being exploited.
I'm for this.
Expelled, I should say.
I'm very much for this. I lived in Belgium, and as a Belgian resident, you go and you sign up at your local commune and you have a digital ID card, and guess what? It ties into your health insurance and all these other things. And I think it's long overdue we have this. We have a massive black market. You see that walking up any high street, car washes, nail bars. We've had health tourism issues for a very long time. People who are here who have outstayed their welcome, who shouldn't be here. We don't know who they are. We've got people coming in and out of the country with criminal records. We're one of the most poorest countries when it comes to actually protecting our welfare system. Look, we've had people, Albanian gangs, exploiting our welfare system to the tune of millions of pounds. That shows how overdue a policy like this is.
And you think that would change it?
Well, I think it's one step. You need to do something. What I would worry about is we have a load of digital ID cards issued, and what happens is the enforcement where it needs to take place doesn't take place, and actually a whole load of other people feel that they're suddenly living under a sort of Chinese Communist Party social credit system. So we need to make sure it's not dystopian, but if it means someone isn't in this country legally who's got no right to medical treatment and they say, well, where's your card? Sorry, you can't have it, which would happen if you were in Belgium, then that is a step we need to take.
But I don't know if I buy all of that, because there's always been tax evasion in this country. I mean, if you look at the 70s and 80s, people were queuing up for the dole while also working at the same time and probably being paid cash in hand. No, but the argument that you're making is the exploitation.
Or not?
But you're arguing that there's an exploitation of the welfare state and of the health, of the NHS, and actually that's still going on. An ID card and migration isn't the reason that's being exploited.
Foreign gangs setting up syndicates, creating fake IDs in order to extort millions of pounds from this country.
Well, Saqib, you don't think that would make any difference?
And to be clear, I think there's a choice between the state doing it and the private sector doing it. And what we were looking at was the private sector. So, and what we saw in Estonia actually was that when the banks adopted it, that was when we had widespread adoption. Clearly, you are moving in that direction. I would be very uncomfortable with governments holding loads of biometric data on citizens, and those were the protections that we were looking at.
Do you mind that TikTok holds that information and that Meta holds that information?
Yeah, I do, and that's why I'm not on TikTok actually. And and that's why I came off it.
But what about Meta? Are you on
look,
X?
that's exactly why we were taking all the measures we were doing in the data bill and how they're approaching it. We've yet to see what the Labour government will do. When I was at the dispatch box last week, there was talk of the digital ID and the One ID actually, and the logins, which we started off. But there is, of course, we don't want to be, I was a tech minister for the UK. We're not anti-tech. We want to move forward, but it's got to be done in a safe way. But this will not stop the votes.
Right. I mean, listening to what Alex was saying about people working here illegally, Labour have already said they're going to have, or they've had, a summer blitz on raiding nail bars and car washes where there are people, or they may be working illegally. So, in a way, you've sort of accepted that it's a problem. Why this aversion, then, to having a digital ID, which could help in that?
Well, I think just picking up on one of the points Alex made, it's all about enforcement, isn't it? And if we haven't got the capacity within the Home Office to do that enforcement piece, really this will just be a conversation that goes backwards and forwards, as it has done for many, many years. So I think the government's approach at the moment to focus on making sure we've got enough people in the Home Office to process cases, making sure that where people shouldn't be here are returned in a orderly manner. That's what we should be focusing on.
Do you think a Labour government over the next 5 years would look at it? You say at the moment.
I mean, if I had a crystal ball...
Yeah, but would you like it? I mean, you're a Labour MP. Would you like them to look at it?
I'd like us to be creative in what we think about how we tackle these issues that the whole entire world is facing. We've got mass migration into lots of European countries, and we need to work across borders to make sure that we look at that. So I'd like us to be creative in what we do. But I think making sure that we get the basics right, making sure that people are actually in the Home Office processing these cases is exactly where we should be focusing our energy.
A final word from you, Sam. Do you think you're going to get anywhere with this campaign for a digital ID with a Labour government?
Well, as I said, we work with governments all around the world, and a huge number of them are starting to go down this path and implement this sort of policy. I think we'll continue making the case. I think the case is quite strong in the UK for all sorts of different reasons. We've talked a lot about immigration, but there's a lot around reducing fraud, targeting benefits, running government more efficiently. There are lots and lots of reasons why digital ID, I think, is a very, very strong proposition for the UK, as it is everywhere else. And we'll carry on having that conversation.
Sam Sharps from the Tony Blair Institute, thank you for joining us.